Welcome to Climate Now. I'm James Lawler. The U.S. Department of Energy, or DOE, was established in 1977 with two key missions: to carry out defense responsibilities related to nuclear weapons, and to bring together under one department the, quote, loosely knit amalgamation, end quote, of various energy projects, the responsibility for which was, at the time, scattered across the United States government. The motivation for the Department of Energy Organization Act of 1977, which created the department, was to develop a better coordinated national energy strategy in the face of new challenges, namely two energy crises and the growing nuclear energy industry. Since then, the DOE's responsibilities have evolved with the challenges that the country has faced. Today, one key dimension of the DOE's role to ensure national energy security is to support low-carbon energy production and related carbon management projects, a term which refers broadly speaking to any project that has the effect of achieving net CO2 emissions reduction. Within that carbon management remit is a responsibility to advance carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. Why? Well, as a reminder, to reach net zero carbon emissions by mid-century, the U.S. will likely need to remove at least 1 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions from the atmosphere every year. We were interested in better understanding how the DOE is supporting that goal today. Our guest today to address that question is Rory Jacobson, the Acting Division Director for Carbon Dioxide Removal in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, or FECM.
That carbon management part is a bit newer for us. That was actually introduced on July 4th of 2021 and really re-emphasize our office's focus on dealing with the carbon dioxide emitted through industrial processes out of flue stacks. And my role particularly is to support technologies that have the capability to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Supporting entrepreneurs, it's supporting universities, national labs, really anyone with the capability to reduce the concentration of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere.
Great. So talk about the mandate of FECM and what was that initially, and then how has that developed to what it is today?
Our directive and our mission within the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management is to produce domestic energy resources at the lowest cost possible while producing high-paying jobs and equitable employment across the United States, and doing so in a way that helps us achieve our Paris Agreement commitments. So that includes things like rare earth elements, critical minerals, but it also includes things like point source carbon capture on existing fossil fuel generation units. It includes things like cement facilities. It includes things like direct air capture facilities. We have a whole suite of different carbon management technologies and energy technologies that we're engaging with within our office.
So we do want to focus today on the Department of Energy's efforts related to CDR, or carbon dioxide removal. So I wonder if you could start just by explaining what is CDR and why is that something that has been determined to be within the department's remit and to deploy taxpayer dollars towards?
So I'll start with the simple answer, which is that Congress asked us to, on behalf of all of the taxpayers that they represent. This is closely following a National Academy's study that indicated that, one, carbon dioxide removal is crucial to meeting our Paris Agreement targets, right? The idea is that we've emitted enough carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We have to remove some of that, both to abate residual emissions, the parts of our economy that we can't decarbonize, but also we have to remove legacy emissions. And we have to give those tools to future generations to deal with that. We now have a carbon negative shot across the entire Department of Energy. And that means that the entire Department of Energy is coordinating and collaborating on this objective to get to $100 per net ton CO2 equivalent removed from the atmosphere by 2032.
For anyone who's newer to the space or less familiar with the jargon, CO2 equivalent emissions are a way of equating the warming effects of any greenhouse gas emissions to the quantity of CO2 it would take to have the same warming effect. Methane's warming effect, for example, is about 30 times as potent as CO2's warming potential. So 1 ton of methane would be considered 30 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, approximately. When Rory talks about net tons removed, he's referring to how much CO2 a CDR, carbon dioxide removal technology or process, removes, minus any emissions from the process itself, whether those are from powering the system or maybe manufacturing steel for the equipment that's required. And finally, the price is how much it costs to remove that net ton of CO2 equivalent emissions. Here's Rory again explaining why the Department of Energy is considering all greenhouse gas emissions in this equation.
The important piece is that we're counting all greenhouse gases. And so we're drawing our life cycle boundaries as broadly as we can because we want to make sure that we're accounting for all the greenhouse gases that go into this process. CO2 is the easiest way for the average person, including policymakers like myself, to talk about the impacts that greenhouse gases have on global warming. I think the IPCC has done a phenomenal job of telling us how to think about those things, especially as policymakers.
Yeah. So in terms of the DOE carbon negative shot and the $100 target, how hard does $100 per ton seem to you today based on, the flow of projects that you see across your desk and the prices we're actually achieving today in the market versus what industry thinks we can get to in the future? I mean, how hard is $100 per ton likely to be?
This is not a low bar. I think it's tough. But I also think that there's important qualifications around that $100 target, right? The Department of Energy is focused first and foremost on reducing emissions across every single sector. That is our priority. That is the most important thing that we can possibly invest in. But like I talked about earlier, the problem is that we've emitted enough CO2 that it's important to have these technologies ready to deploy 2030 and beyond to make sure that we're able to clean up residual emissions. We're not looking at carbon dioxide removal as an out to not clean up those opportunities, but we know that we're likely to need it. $100 per ton is hard, and not all technologies are going to make that threshold, and that's perfectly okay. We know that we need some of them for very different reasons. And there are also complex and community dimensions, things that folks are willing to host in their backyard, technologies that folks are willing to get excited about, to partner with, that can be opportunities for their region based on their resources. And so the cost of any one of these carbon dioxide removal pathways deployed in one geography will look very different than another. And that's based on electricity costs, that's based on cost of labor, that's based on a wide variety of different opportunities.
Yeah. And I think we have to acknowledge that we've got to do something about the CO2 one way or the other. We've got to remove it, develop new technologies that don't emit it. And we need to do it at the lowest possible price. And 100 is getting pretty low in terms of dollars per ton.
I think that's right. And I think we see that things like natural climate solutions could potentially even have negative costs, right? And that seems confusing, but there are a wide variety of co-benefits to those opportunities such that the intervention actually is beneficial in terms of cost to the farmer or to the forester. And then there are other technologies where we're looking at things like direct air capture, right? Technologies that remove CO2 from the ambient atmosphere. Those facilities are inherently costly. They require a lot of energy and heat to operate. We can decarbonize that energy and heat, absolutely, but it's always a cost. And I think it's also a public good, right? We are reducing the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And I see that as a net public good inherently.
Yeah. So tell us about the Voluntary Carbon Dioxide Removal Purchasing Challenge, which is a new initiative that your office is spearheading. How is that meant to work in terms of engaging the private sector in CDR efforts?
So I'm going to start by naming actually another initiative, which is last year in financial year 23, the Department of Energy got an interesting instruction from Congress, which was to start a pilot CDR purchasing initiative. And we stood up what is now the Carbon Dioxide Removal Pilot Purchase Prize. And we have $35 million that's committed to actually buying carbon dioxide removal credits as the federal government of the United States. And I think that's a huge opportunity. In September, we kickstarted the rules for this program. We've now received applications and will release semifinalists that will receive a cash prize to participate as semifinalists towards an opportunity to actually provide the U.S. federal government with carbon dioxide removal credits.
A note to our listeners, we recorded this interview at the beginning of April 2024. And since this interview, at the end of May 2024, the FECM has released their semifinalists. If you'd like to see their list, the link will be in our transcript at climatenow.com. Back to what Rory had to say about why DOE is helping to fund these projects.
Now, where this actually leads into the voluntary carbon dioxide removal purchasing challenge that you mentioned is that we can't do this alone. The federal government has an outsized role in purchasing and elevating the importance of demand-side opportunities for the carbon dioxide removal market. I mean, it is a public good. We need folks to buy tons of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere to make this work, or we need governments to take action and create demand for these technologies. And that's what we're trying to do as Department of Energy. We can't do that alone. And we've acknowledged, I think, importantly, that the private sector has an outsized role in doing this. We are not the first folks to think that buying carbon dioxide removal is important for climate. In the background, we see regulatory rulings from the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, thinking about how do companies disclose this sort of thing, right? Like if you're buying the highest quality carbon dioxide removal, if you want to do the best practices, how do you think about telling your board, your shareholders, that you're doing that sort of exercise? And I think one of the biggest challenges that the carbon dioxide removal market has faced is lack of transparency. And there are some phenomenal people doing the work today, and it's a really challenging job. To get to your question, James, what is DOE doing? We intend to build out a program. And I want to be clear with the public that that is what that means, right? Like we have aspirations to build this program. We're seeking public comments because we take your feedback very seriously in how we structure this program, because we want to optimize for transparency.
So Rory, what is the concept here? What are you asking of the private sector?
So James, I think that's a great question. It is a notice to the private sector, to state and local governments, to tribes, anyone that wants to engage with us, that there's an opportunity to work with the Department of Energy to disclose what your carbon dioxide removal purchases or deliveries are. And I think we're looking at both ends of that. And maybe the easiest piece for me is to start on folks who buy carbon dioxide removal credits. There are a number of different reasons that folks would do this, right? Or large corporates would do this, local governments would do this. The first is probably meeting a climate target, right? In order to get to whatever target that they've set requires some amount of carbon dioxide removal. They've set a target that is so awesomely ambitious that they actually need to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And I think we should encourage that. The second piece is they actually just want to support it philanthropically for other reasons, that they think this is an important industry to grow. And I think both of those reasons are super valid. And I think we want to know, first of all, why people are buying these credits. I think that's a huge piece of this that we don't see in press releases the average person in the world doesn't engage with very often, right?
Yeah. And so, Roy, from where you sit and all the thinking that you've done about carbon removal, if you were to put yourself 20 years into the future, how ideally would you want to see carbon dioxide removal deployed? Like, do we treat this like we treat trash removal? It's like something that everybody does. We made a decision sort of that we weren't going to live like that anymore. And now we have sewers and we have a more robust waste disposal process in most parts of the world, right? What's kind of the longer term vision for how this set of technologies fits into, regulatory landscape in the future? Understanding it's not there today, but...
Right. So, James, I'm going to speak from a government point of view that we've achieved the carbon negative shot, right? Like our portfolio of carbon dioxide removal solutions is at that $100 per ton net CO2 equivalent. That's huge. I think one other piece that's really important is international engagement, right? And so I hope that there is a broader global consortium of countries that are willing to invest in these technologies in the research and development side and the demonstration deployment side. But I hope that these technologies 10, 20 years out are at a place where we're actually doing the work that integrated assessment models have told us that we should be doing. And I love working with our analysis group. But what they tell us is that we need probably at least a gigaton of carbon dioxide removal by 2035, 2040, and then thereon by 2050, the U.S. should be contributing probably over a gigaton of carbon dioxide removal year over year. But a gigaton is massive, right? Like this is a tremendous amount. I think the important piece that folks understand is that it's a portfolio. Marine carbon dioxide removal, soil carbon sequestration, afforestation, reforestation, direct air capture, biomass with carbon removal and storage, creating energy products, just storing that biomass in a way that is durable. So we have an entire suite of tools. I can't tell you what the distribution is going to be across them, but I do know that I'm pretty confident that we can get to that gigaton at least.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a clear answer to this or not, but where does the $100 a ton come from? Like in terms of setting that number, does it come from any particular analysis that says if we can get it to this, then it's possible to pay for it through a series of mechanisms that is deemed to be acceptable in the future? Or like, why isn't it $200 or $50?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So if we look at domestic incentives to stop carbon pollution in the US, right? I think the 45Q tax credit is a great example. You've got $85 a ton, and that's just below 100. So when you're thinking about the opportunity cost of should I just remove this, at the flue stack and potentially like get this incentive to abate the emission, or should I think about, the idea that a carbon dioxide removal technology should be the incentive instead? And again, I would reaffirm and clarify that the incentive for direct air capture exclusively is higher under 45Q. That's $180 per ton.
Right.
The idea is that, I think $100 stops just short of most industries that are polluting today, where they would reasonably intervene within their own supply chain to stop CO2 from entering the atmosphere, right? At the point where we don't need to do carbon removal. That's the important piece, right? The idea that we hopefully don't have to do as much carbon removal as we think we might have to.
Yeah. And so, Rory, we did an episode a long time ago on what cost society pays, right, through loss and damage and, et cetera, associated with climate change. And those studies that look into social cost of carbon put out a cost per ton, right, of CO2 in terms of what the cost is to society. So if right now the cost to remove at hundreds of dollars a ton is actually higher than most estimates of what the social cost of carbon is at maybe $200 a ton or between 1 and 200. And I know that at a certain point, federal procurement laws had a particular social cost of carbon associated with them. And now I'm getting way out of my depth.
I think that logically is the intervention point. Once we've crossed that threshold, it makes sense to reduce human suffering and to benefit the planet by removing that CO2. I think there are a bunch of questions about what those projects look like, where they are, and who funds them, how they operate, who gets to say whether or not they move forward, how long they exist. That's where things, I think, get complicated.
Right. So speaking of which projects move forward, is there anything you can share with us on the 35 million procurement of carbon credits as far as the types of projects or sectors that you're working with?
Even if you're not a carbon dioxide removal wonk, I would encourage you to read the rules document, even the first couple pages, because it will tell you a lot about how we as DOE think this market works. What we thought about really were the technologies that Congress told us to look at from day one, right? And there are a couple of different technology verticals that are included there, particularly the ones that are included in that purchasing effort. Direct air capture, engineered technologies that remove CO2, that store CO2 either in products or in the geologic subsurface. We have biomass with carbon removal and storage. Enhanced rock weathering. This one is wonky for a lot of folks. The idea that rocks can actually absorb CO2 more quickly. They're doing it every day. They're doing it at the scale of billion tons a year. And then all of the other things that exist, right? So like ways to remove CO2 from the upper ocean, the hydrosphere, and anything that we didn't think of in those first three topics. I think that the most exciting piece of this is that Congress has given us, in our budget directive, another $20 million to run this program again. And so we're going to take all of the learnings from this first round and do this process over, and hopefully much better, much more conducive to the industry where it is in a year or two.
Yeah. So in the description of this program on the DOE's website, it says you've got up to 10 winners, 375,000, and up to 10 that could receive up to $3 million for their pilot project. What are you looking for these various applicants to actually produce for, let's say, the $3 million? What does success look like for them?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. As a government thinking about prizes, we want to have a couple of different tiers, right, of vetting and I think particularly technical diligence on these projects, like durable, additional, well-verified, scientifically rigorous carbon dioxide removal that the Department of Energy could purchase. And so that's where the $3 million really becomes an opportunity for those 10 leading entities to work with us to develop functionally what looks like a carbon dioxide removal purchasing agreement that explains everything from their measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification strategy to their verifier, to their strategy around long-term maintenance, permanence of the carbon dioxide that's stored. All of those pieces go into consideration there. And I think the other really important thing that I should have led with actually is community benefits plans. How does this actually impact the folks that are working on the project? Who are we hiring to deliver these tons? Who are the folks that are going to cohabitate with this project? How are they benefiting? All of those really important pieces, I think, are front and center to this prize.
Again, if you want to check out the list of semifinalists, it's linked in our transcript on our website at climatenow.com. We've talked a few times about the DAC hubs, and I don't know if you could share a little bit on what the DAC hubs were in case folks didn't hear those episodes, and then maybe give us an update about where those various efforts stand today, what we can look forward to with the DAC hubs nationally.
Yeah, absolutely. The Regional DAC Hubs program was authorized and appropriated through the infrastructure law. So we've got $3.5 billion going towards building DAC hubs that can sequester up to 1 million tons of CO2 per project per year across 4 projects. And I think that it was so thoughtful with the rollout of this program. I think the first really important, thoughtful thing that we did was feasibility studies, right? Like, where could different DAC technologies be deployed, right? Like, how do different DAC technologies, direct air capture technologies, perform in different climates, with different use cases, with different energy sources? The second piece is front-end engineering and design studies, FEED studies. We funded 5 of those as fossil energy and carbon management. And this is a real detailed design stage where we look at a project and we lay out what materials do you need to procure, how many employees do you need, what does operation look like, all of the pieces that go into actually building a project, including, of course, the most important figure that we've been talking about. What is the levelized cost of carbon dioxide removal associated with that project? There are 19 projects included within fossil energy and carbon management scopes there. Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, our partner at DOE, has 2 other projects, one of which was actually just awarded $50 million, Project Cypress. It is in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and I had the privilege of going down, actually walking the site and attending a community meeting, hearing the feedback from folks that will live around, work on that project potentially. And I think that we as DOE have a tremendous responsibility to engage with those folks and both articulate the opportunity associated with some of these technologies, but also to understand that it might not necessarily always be conducive to the immediate needs of every single stakeholder.
What can you tell us about the way that communities are responding to the prospect of these projects? Like, what are those conversations like, on the ground around where these might be deployed?
Yeah, for those folks that were, well aware of what CO2e meant, I would encourage you to read Selena Scott Buechler's work recently published about how to do good community engagement, particularly in direct air capture. I think the piece is out in Nature now.
We'll have that work linked in the transcript on our website.
We have a lot of education to do. And I think that, James, it boils down to the number of hours in a day, right? The average person works 8, 10 hours a day. They go home, they pick up their kids, they make a meal. And there isn't a lot of time to read articles about what this nascent climate technology is and how it could benefit them. What they know are industries that have historically polluted. That's the challenge there, right? Is that direct air capture, it's actually cleaning up, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And it's already a huge ask to request that folks engage with us, right? To learn about this technology, to learn about the opportunity. We've yet to do a lot of really important work about how direct air capture could be coupled to technologies that also reduce other atmospheric pollutants, things like PM 2.5 and harmful atmospheric pollutants that do cause public health hazards, right? What I will say is that we know that we need direct air capture to achieve our climate goals. And I think that there are a lot of important questions to ask project developers around type of jobs. How long will they be around for? What do they look like? How much do they pay? Are you hiring locally? Like all of the questions that we as DOE would ask of a community benefits plan. That's the opportunity I see in the near term. But I also think that DOE is very keen to engage the public about how to do better on those pieces, right?
Coming back to CDR and kind of the voluntary carbon removal purchasing challenge, can you talk about the response that you've had so far?
Typically when we put out a notice of intent, the purpose of that is really to inform companies, universities, NGOs that might apply that an opportunity is forthcoming. in this case, we saw support much earlier than that, actually. The day that we put this out, Google said we would happily match your commitment of CDR purchasing. I think that's a phenomenal nod at, I hope, the work that the Department of Energy is doing in carbon dioxide removal purchasing, but also an exemplary effort to demonstrate that this is doable for companies, right? DOE, like many small, chief sustainability offices, is purchasing CDR. And we're doing this for the first time. We're doing diligence on projects. We're looking at different technologies. And unlike those small companies, we have the ability to leverage our national labs, to leverage all of the expertise across, the entire Department of Energy. And we hope that when we actually launch the challenge formally, that we get that same response from a whole bunch of other companies, but not just, the Googles of the world, but also folks that might have been hesitant to engage with something like carbon dioxide removal credits. When you're sort of already a sustainability leader in your fields and you have that opportunity where you have a little bit of budget expenditure to allocate towards carbon dioxide removal credits, what are the best opportunities to do that? That's where DOE can demonstrate, a list of companies that we think are promising or suppliers that we think are promising, and then give some transparency to the market. At what volume are folks doing this? How are they allocating it within their scope 1 through 3? Over what duration are they making these sorts of deals? All of those components that have been missing from this market in terms of transparency.
Right. It sounds like you would envision at some point there being a website, which might be a government or DOE site, that would track as much as possible the market for carbon dioxide removal credits. And like who's buying what against, from what projects.
We intend for that to exist. I think that's the clearest that I can articulate that as clear as possible. And I think the other point that I haven't talked about is standards, methodologies. Like, how are we actually doing the quantification of carbon dioxide removal? And who's doing that verification? How do we know that they're unbiased, right? And how are they doing their reporting? I think those are huge pieces of this and an important component of transparency in the market.
Yeah, so there are various companies that have established protocols for assessing the quality of carbon removal projects. And there are rating systems now that have been developed that will rate a project across dimensions like permanence, additionality. So to what degree do you expect, Rory, that DOE will piggyback off of efforts that have already been described publicly versus develop your own methodology to do this?
So, maybe the place where I'll start is that in our carbon dioxide removal purchase pilot price rules, we do lay out criteria, right? And we want to be very transparent about that. Like, here's what we think a good credit looks like. And I think importantly, we don't use the term offset, right? But in the near term, I think it's unlikely that we actually specify what a company needs to do to be a CDR supplier to the Department of Energy, short of the criteria that we've already listed.
Got it. What does success look like for you? As you've defined it internally around this challenge.
Yeah, I think success looks like gravitating towards this high quality market, right? And I think we've seen leadership from coalitions in the private sector point us in this direction. And I hope that some government guidance and government purchasing can help with that. And I would like to see dollars directed there as opposed to, other sorts of offset claims that have less rigor, have less scientific backing. And I think the really important piece, James, that we're going to have to deal with and, future generations will have to deal with is the monitoring piece, right? To know that carbon remains sequestered, which is, again, a whole other episode.
Awesome. Well, Rory, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate spending all this time with us. Thank you.
Yeah, James. Great to finally meet you.
Yeah, you too. That's it for this episode of Climate Now with the Department of Energy's Rory Jacobson. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about today's conversation, please visit our website, climatenow.com, where we always upload source transcripts of our episodes, and we link out to various references and articles that you may find useful. If you have any questions about this episode, or if you know someone whom you think would make a great guest, feel free to email us at contact@climatenow.com. Thanks for listening, and hope you'll join us for our next conversation.